This could take a while, so bear with me. I'll try to keep it brief. AJ here. Welcome back to Art Isn't Easy. So today is a big day because, as I alluded to before, 1964 is one of my favorite years of film of all time. And it's a year that I don't really hear talked about much as being one of the best years ever. But when I looked at this list, I knew that it was just insane. I'm going to be listing 10 honorable mentions because all of those films met a 4.5 star rating for me. This is a pretty strong year. And some of these films don't get talked about much, so I am excited to delve into them. However, because of how many films I'm going to discuss, I don't want to delve too much into the honorable mentions just for the sake of time. I'm already taking a half hour to discuss like 10 films, so I don't want to like end up going crazy. But so I'm going to quickly go through my 10 honorable mentions and just kind of say something brief about them. So my first honorable mention is Nobuo Nakamura's The Shape of Night. And I feel like this one is sort of vibrant in a way that reminds me of what Wong Kar Wai would eventually do with his work of the 90s or like 2000s in Food for Love. The color, the themes of complicated love, because we focus on a woman named Yoshi. She holds two jobs, one at a factory, one as a bar hostess, and she begins developing a rapport with one of the bar patrons. And let's just say that this bar patron is someone who takes a special liking in waving around a bunch of red flags, if you catch my drift. My next honorable mention is Love Meetings, which was a documentary by the infamous Pier Paolo Pasolini, who most people know these days as being the guy behind Salo. And also, it was due to that film, and amongst other things, that he was brutally attacked and murdered. I don't want to encourage people to look up very disturbing subject matter, but what that man went through is like, I mean, we're talking like Matthew Shepard levels of brutality. But Love Meetings is about Pasolini going around Italy asking people about the topic of sex because, God forbid, people talk about sex because, like, oh, God, sex. Oh, what an evil, vile thing. We only need to do it when we're getting married. Like, what's this fornicating you're talking about? So, and then we have Jan Nemec's Diamonds in the Night. So, Diamonds in the Night is about two teenage boys who are on the run because they're trying to avoid the Nazis. Because if they get caught, they're going to get sent to a concentration camp. I do feel like Holocaust films get a bad rap. Like I always think about that episode of Extras when Kate Winslet makes the joke like I'm doing this film, Holocaust film to win a bloody Oscar. Diamonds in the Night is one that I feel like does not get discussed enough. Next up, we have Blake Edwards' The Pink Panther. This one I'm cheating a bit with because it was released overseas in 1963, but it was released here in 1964, and I decided to include it on this list, even though I'm usually a pretty big stickler for keeping films on these lists based on the year that they came out in their original country. The Pink Panther is pretty iconic. I mean, Peter Sellers, the Henry Mancini music. I don't feel like I have to go like too much into that one. However, I do want to talk about Gertrude, which was the final film of Carl Theodor Dreyer, who is most known for directing The Passion of Joan of Arc, which gave us that great Renee Maria Falconetti performance, which, despite being a silent film, it still shows like that might stand as one of the greatest performances ever captured on film. But Gertrude is about a middle-aged woman. She was a former concert pianist, but she ends up developing an interest in this younger man. But then she ends up having an encounter with a lover from her past. And I do like to acknowledge how Dreyer loved his one-shot takes. And there is a 10-minute scene in this film where Gertrude is talking with her lover. It's just the two of them talking, and it's amazing how like such scenes like that are very effective. Gertrude is definitely an interesting character piece. I do feel like more people should check that one out. But next up, we're going to dive into the world of Japanese horror with Onibaba, which is directed by Kaneto Shindo. This one is about a woman and her daughter-in-law who routinely kill samurai that are going through their area as a means to get their armor for protection. But then it takes a bit of a turn where a neighbor of theirs returns from fighting in the war, and that man ends up becoming a bit of a contention point between the mother and the daughter-in-law. So, yes, fun times. Now, I mentioned Come and See earlier, which was directed by Ilim Klimov, the Belarusian director. But here we have a film of his called Welcome or No Trespassing, which is, let's see, this one's about a young boys' school, a Soviet young boys' school. And these group of boys are trying to fight against the restrictive rules of their elders. I've heard this film described as having elements of like a Wes Anderson energy, and I do agree with that. I'm not saying it's like it's in black and white, so it's not like insanely colorful, and the cinematography is not what Wes Anderson usually has. But there is a certain whimsy to it, and which is even more fascinating when you realize it's Ilim Klimov. So next up, as an honorable mention, we have Sidney Lumet's Failsafe, which is a more serious look into the world of nuclear Armageddon, because there is a certain film coming up on my top 10 that took a more satirical look, shall we say. But Failsafe is a very strong film. I mean, Sidney Lumet was always a great director of actors, so you do get a lot of strong, as you saw with like 12 Angry Men before, how you'd see with Network after, and Dog Day Afternoon. Like Lumet was an actor's director, and you do get a great ensemble feel with Failsafe. But next up, we're going to dive back into Japanese horror again with Masaki Kobayashi's Quaden. This one I really think is a great topic because it's about a group of vengeful spirits who are out to torture humankind. I mean, they want moral retribution, and they don't care the least about human suffering. So it's quite the vengeful film that way that takes on that eerie supernatural vibe, which I really love. But my last honorable mention is Richard Lester's A Hard Day's Night. This is the film that Spice World wishes it was. Now, the thing is, Lennon, McCartney, Harrison, and Starr were not actors. But we can't deny that they had, or at least, I mean, McCartney and like Starr are with us still, but they had a lot of charisma. And I feel like the script by Alan Owen, which actually did get an Oscar nomination, it's a very witty script. And Richard Lester was a great director because he was good. He sort of made it like that documentary, mockumentary film before mockumentary was even a thing. But they were able to capture what made each of those four men very fascinating to watch. So I do feel like A Hard Day's Night is a film that shouldn't have worked, but it worked remarkably well, which is more than I could say for Spice World. But we've arrived at the top 10. Let's all bask in the glory of what we're about to witness, which so yes, long story short, I went on vacation. I tried to edit this video while on vacation, only to discover that my entire top 10 was void of sound. Not sure how that happened. I guess the microphone shorted or ran out of battery. I don't know. But here we are. So we're going to continue with my top 10, which begins with Brian Forbes' Seance on a Wet Afternoon. This one I'm including on my list. A big reason is Kim Stanley, her work in this. Also, not to mention, as a concept, I really love the concept of this film. So, Seance on a Wet Afternoon revolves around Kim Stanley as Myra. She is a middle class housewife. She works as a medium. And a lot of the money that comes in is from her work because her husband Bill is asthmatic. He can't work as consistently. So she proposes an idea. She says, how about you kidnap that daughter from the Clayton family? Because they're wealthy. They'll want to put out a reward for finding out where Amanda is. And then Myra will come forward and be like, I'm a medium. Let me help locate her. And then when they offer the reward money to Myra, she's like, oh, no, I can't do that. I'm just doing my duty. And then she'll have a lot of basically acclaim come her way for being so noble. But needless to say, that's not going to work out well for her. So Kim Stanley is wonderful in this film, and she was the critical favorite that year. But later up in this top 10, we're going to get the film that contained that year's Best Actress winner, which, as some of you might know, was a very juicy story. But coming up at number 9, we have Mikhail Kalatozov's I Am Cuba. This one was viewed as some form of Soviet propaganda, and it was a joint production between Kalatozov, who was the same Soviet filmmaker who made Letter Never Sent and The Cranes Are Flying. Oh, this one does delve into multiple stories. It's not quite like an anthology, but it talks about like oppression. Like one story, for example, involves a prostitute who's afraid to tell her boyfriend that she actually does this for a living. We have a group of students protesting that are going to Havana University, but one of them goes rogue and decides he wants to assassinate the chief of police. But one thing I want to point out about I Am Cuba is the film did go missing for a while, and it was in the 90s when a group of filmmakers, including Scorsese, viewed the film and was very impressed by the cinematography. The cinematography of I Am Cuba is way ahead of its time. It's very chaotic, it's lively, there's a lot of like upside down, zooming shots, and it's just like, it kind of reminds me of a forerunner to like what we would get with Apocalypse Now to an extent. And number 8 is the complete opposite of that because I wouldn't be surprised if all of you have seen this one, and that is Robert Stevenson's Mary Poppins. So, yeah, there's not really much to say about Mary Poppins. You've all seen it. The Magical Nanny, or as The Simpsons would refer to her, Sherry Bobbins. But, yeah, don't want to get sued by Disney. So, yes, Julie Andrews was the person who won Best Actress that year. And as a lot of you may know, she was famously passed over for the role of Eliza Doolittle in the film adaptation of My Fair Lady because Jack Warner of Warner Brothers deemed her to be too unknown. She wouldn't be marketable enough. And here's what's interesting. My Fair Lady did sweep the Oscars that year, won Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor for Rex Harrison, but the woman that played Eliza Doolittle, Audrey Hepburn, was not even nominated. And one of the big things that became well known about that was that Audrey Hepburn could not do the singing. She acted the part well, but this is where the idea of people getting dubbed was not considered a viable choice. Like it's half of a performance is kind of what the theme was at that time, and it's sort of become since then. I don't think Julie Andrews won on merit for Mary Poppins. She clearly won for essentially not being cast in My Fair Lady. What I do love is that My Fair Lady may have swept the Oscars, but the highest grossing film of that year was Mary Poppins. So last laugh. And then again, Julie Andrews became a very bankable star there for a couple of years. Now, for something completely different, we're going to take a trip to Japan, and we have Mashiro Shinoda's Pale Flower. This one is another bittersweet story. In fact, bittersweet might be a wrong phrase. It's about a gangster named Meraki. He's released from prison. He ends up getting involved with this woman named Seiko that he loses a large sum of money to when he decides to get back into some gambling. And then from there, their relationship spirals into something just rather dark. Let's just say there's a lot of gambling, there's a lot of heroin. Just what's there not to love? Pale Flower is a very underrated film from this time period. You do hear a lot about the Kurosawa films, the Ozu films, and you don't really hear a lot about Mashiro Shinoda at all. In fact, I don't believe I've even seen a lot of their work. Number 6 is a bit of a divisive film, at least in terms of other filmmakers and what they thought of it, and that is Michelangelo Antonioni's Red Desert. For example, Andrei Tarkovsky hated this film. He thought that he was too involved in the visual aesthetics to care enough about character and story, whereas Akira Kurosawa thought it was one of the greatest films ever made. I would say this is maybe his most underrated film, actually, and it's the last of his films to contain Monica Vitti. VT plays Juliana. She has a son and a husband, but she was in a car accident. And after the car accident, she's left traumatized and mute. Her husband is feeling rather helpless. He can't seem to help her get out of this fugue state. Yes, there are a lot of visual aesthetic flourishes in Red Desert. In fact, it was the first film that Antonioni shot in color. And the more that I think about Red Desert, the more that I think it might even be my favorite of his films, which I can't, I mean, it's hard to say. The thing is, none of them passionately stand out enough to me to make that call. Some days I might prefer Red Desert. Other days I prefer Le Notte or La Ventura. It's really hard to say. And sometimes it's just hard to compare films that way. We're going to dive into the world of Mikio Neruse again. And we have Yearning. Yearning has another very bittersweet, tragic tale to weave, and that is the story of a war widow named Reiko, who's played by Hideko Takamine, who is also in When a Woman Ascends the Stairs, which was quite possibly Neruse's masterpiece that came out in 1960. Reiko, like I said, war widow. She runs her late husband's general store, but a more fancy supermarket opens up down the road, and her late husband's family, like her in laws, want to sell the store. But there is one person along with her that doesn't want to sell, and that is her brother in law, her younger brother in law, who just so happens to be in love with her. I do want to single out Takamine's work here because she is remarkable at silent acting to the point that Naruse would sit down with her and she would be like, I don't need to say all these words, let me convey it with my face. And she's one of the more unsung actresses of all time. You know what? Yeah, hyperbole be damned. She's one of the most underrated actresses of all time. And now we have a film from another master, and that's Satyajit Ray, and this is Charulata. Ray made his mark with the Apu trilogy, like Pather Panjali, those films. But I do love that his 60s films, such as Charulata and The Big City, which I've already talked about, have a female protagonist. Charulata is the name of our protagonist, and the film is set in 1879 Calcutta. She has a husband, he works for a newspaper, but she is very well read and wants more out of life, which is sort of similar to our protagonist from The Big City. She may be our protagonist, but a lot of the film's energy is permeated by this patriarchal husband figure and how it affects her. So her husband, Bupati is his name, his cousin Amal comes to visit, and let's just say that his influence on her and his interest in what she wants to pursue out of life becomes a little more intertwined than most people would probably like to see. I do love the ending to Charlotta. It's a freeze frame with a hand reaching out to another hand, but they don't connect. That's all I'll say. Maybe that's even saying too much, but it's a very striking image, and I love what Ray did with that because it's unresolved and it kind of leaves you to interpret what's about to happen. I actually would love to see it again. That's the great thing about this process because I'm really thinking about these films that I might have seen once or twice but haven't seen in a while. And maybe on some level, some of these films would shift around, like maybe Charlotta would somehow become my number one film if I rewatched it again. And for number three, we do have a bit of a doozy. And let's just say we're going to take a little stroll in the rain because it's time for Jacques Demy's The Umbrellas of Cherbourg. I hope I don't have to pay for that. Maybe I will because I opened an umbrella indoors and that is bad luck. And I'm somewhat superstitious, so heaven help me. Now, The Umbrellas of Cherbourg is a film that you wonder how could this work? And I'm sure there are people out there that feel it doesn't work. The premise of the film is very simple. You have two young lovers, Geneviève, played by Catherine Deneuve in what was her breakout role, and then Guy, who is played by Nino Castelnuovo, who actually just recently passed away a couple years ago. He works as a mechanic. She works in her mother's umbrella shop, hence the title. They are madly in love. Her mother is not overly fond of that. In fact, Genevieve keeps it a secret from her mother for quite a while. But then one could call Umbrellas of Cherbourg an anti-war film because they ship poor Guy off to Algiers to fight. The two of them consummate their relationship right before they go, and lo and behold, Genevieve gets a bun in the oven. La La Land wishes. Damien Chazelle was inspired by Umbrellas of Cherbourg and also Jacques Demy's upcoming musical, The Young Girls of Roquefort, and he failed. I know that's a hot take. In fact, you might be seeing a video about La La Land soon on this channel, which I'm going to just leave it at that and you'll see what happens there. I will say Umbrellas of Cherbourg, which I just recently rewatched. I have talked about it on this channel because I do own the Criterion. Okay, number two. I did strongly consider putting this one at number one, and on any given day, maybe it would be number one, and that is Stanley Kubrick's Doctor Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. Yes, this was the satirical take on the nuclear Armageddon theme I talked about earlier. Doctor Strangelove begins the magnificent reign of Kubrick, where he made 7 masterpieces in a row before he passed away in 1999. There's a lot to say about Doctor Strangelove. Peter Sellers is magnificent in all 3 of his roles. You have George C. Scott in his manic energy performance that Kubrick secretly mined out of him. I once heard someone describe George C. Scott in this film as very Tim Robinson coded, and I actually really, really love that. I'm never saying that I want to see Doctor Strangelove remade, but if something like that were to occur, Tim Robinson needs to be tapped to play Turgidson. Now, Kubrick was a madman. He was also a genius. I love that the film's shot in black and white, but that he insisted that the round table have a green top like a poker table because these people were gambling for their lives, for the world's lives. And then at the end, we get serenaded by Vera Lynn. We'll meet again as we watch the world just descend into nuclear madness. And it's kind of hard to say what Kubrick's best film is. Like, on a technical level and for impact, obviously 2001 is a very obvious choice, which, spoiler alert for 1968. Because each film of his is so different, you can't help but like try to weigh which one you prefer more. There have been times I've actually said I prefer Doctor Strangelove. There's also the accessibility factor of The Shining. There's the incredible technical and like visual aesthetics of Barry Lyndon. As for a war film, you really can't go wrong with Full Metal Jacket or the brilliance of the anti-war World War One epic that was Paths of Glory. I would say that Kubrick is probably my favorite English language filmmaker, and I know that he is problematic in a lot of ways, but that 7 film streak is hard to pass over. And then you have like Paths of Glory made before that. That's 8 masterpieces right there. And then you have a film like The Killing, which is a very good film that would be high up on most filmmakers' careers, but it's one of his lesser films by default. Lolita, despite the gall it took to make it, is very flaccid for being made at that time. But it's very stylish. James Mason makes a compelling Humbert Humbert. So, I mean, it's just Spartacus isn't really truly a Kubrick film in my eyes, but his name's attached to it. It's a strong film in its own right. So Kubrick is a legend, and as some of you probably know, Criterion will be releasing a $600 Kubrick set in October, which, let's just say, I will not be paying $600 for it. And the thought of paying even like 480 on the website right now, or even like 300 when it's like on the half of 50% off sale, I can't even fathom that. But my birthday happens to be in October. Needless to say, I think I know what I'll be getting as a personal birthday present to myself, unless someone out there wants to donate one to me. So now let me just take a little moment to just beg to you. Let me just get on my knees here. Just get on my knees. Like, please, 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 someone buy me the Kubrick box set because I'm not exactly a wealthy man. Yeah, so yeah, just let me just turn around. Okay. So yes, don't mind me. And we've also made it to number one. So let's talk about yet another great Japanese film, and that is Woman in the Dunes. I love that Teshigahara got a Best Director nomination for this because it feels completely random. But Teshigahara getting a director nomination for this film, I would go as far to say it's one of my favorite director nominations ever. Maybe even just in general. Like I love that this nomination happened. So Woman in the Dunes is about a man named Miki, and he's a jackass. I mean, there's no way around it. Miki is a jackass. And he's on an expedition to find some beetles because he considers himself something of an amateur entomologist. The tour group that he came with from Tokyo can't stand him. So when they all go to leave, they don't give a flying fig that he's not there. So the locals around the area take Miki in, including this one woman who offers him to stay with her. This woman we only know of as the widow. And she lives in a little hut right below a sand dune. And she has to keep shoveling out sand because if she doesn't, she will get consumed and suffocated by the sand pouring into her home. Can't really say that's a ringing endorsement to go move to that area of Japan, but I guess we wouldn't have a story otherwise. And not surprisingly, these two become lovers, and the film just continues descending into madness from there. The interesting thing about Woman in the Dunes is it's a beautiful film, but I don't mean beautiful as in subject matter. Teshigahara manages to film stunning landscape shots of like these sandy dunes. In many ways, it's like the black and white counterpart to Lawrence of Arabia. Although Lawrence of Arabia was a very different kind of film, very expansive, but still, there's something so alluring about Woman in the Dunes, even though I literally just mentioned that I was going to put Doctor Strangelove at number one. And Woman in the Dunes is a film that I'm not necessarily going to rewatch a lot. I can't say that I've even rewatched Doctor Strangelove too many times. If anything, on this list, aside from Mary Poppins, the only one that I've seen significantly more than the others was Umbrellas of Cherbourg. And honestly, there's a world where I could consider Umbrellas of Cherbourg to be my number one film here. Doctor Strangelove very much could be. Woman in the Dunes, I just feel like I love the concept, I love the acting, I love the visuals, I love the story. It just creates such a dark and really bleak and creepy atmosphere that it kind of just gives it that extra little kick that made me want to single it out as number one. And with that, we come to the end of 1964. Let me catch my breath because this was an epic year of insane proportions. And as I've alluded to before, 1965 is not that. In fact, 1965 will be both an easy and hard video to make because one, I'll only be discussing 10 films, so that's easy. But most of my top 10 are films that I can't say I like love with any intense passion. I hope you all enjoyed this. I'm very happy to finally get this video posted because I recorded it 4th of July weekend and then realized, oh shoot, this does not have sound for the majority of it. So here we are, and I appreciate all of you that have been watching these, and we'll be back soon with 1965. Oh, and one more thing. I did make some purchases from Barnes& and Noble's Criterion sale. I did make one purchase in store while I was on vacation, but the others I've ordered online. I will be doing an unboxing video in like another week or so once those all arrive. I should have about 15 to 20 coming, so it'll be a decent haul. I hope you all will be looking forward to that, and I'll see you all soon. Take care, everyone. Bye bye.